Today we're diving into something really fascinating. We're going to look at how scientists use drugs in a way you probably haven't thought about before. Not just to understand the drugs themselves, but to use them as a kind of magnifying glass for the mind, a key to unlock the very mechanics of our behavior.
So let's just jump right in with a huge question. How in the world do you scientifically study something you can't see? Like a private thought or a feeling. It's one of the biggest challenges in psychology.
And as you can imagine, it gets a whole lot harder when your subjects are lab animals. They can't exactly sit down and tell you what they're feeling, right? So, how do you get inside their heads? Well, the answer is pretty unexpected. It comes from behavioral pharmacology. That's right. Scientists use drugs as these incredible chemical tools that let them pry open and analyze the hidden machinery running behind the scenes of our actions.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to see how drugs can act as internal signals, how they can totally shake up old theories, how we can use their known effects to our advantage, and finally, what all this scientific detective work really tells us about behavior itself.
Now, a lot of the time, when you hear about behavioral pharmacology, it's about screening new drugs or figuring out how they work. But we're focusing on this third really cool goal, using drugs as an analytical tool, like a magnifying glass for behavior. Our first stop is all about using drugs as internal signals. And let me tell you, this approach really messes with some of our most basic ideas about stuff like rewards and even how we learn to talk about our own feelings.
First, though, a super quick refresher on a huge concept, reinforcement. All it means is that if something happens right after a behavior, and it makes that behavior more likely in the future, it's a reinforcer. You press a lever, you get a food pellet, so you press the lever more. Simple, right? Well, maybe not so fast.
For years, scientists really struggled to get rats to self-administer nicotine. I mean, it was weird, right? It's so addictive for humans. They eventually found a procedure that worked, but it accidentally created a whole new mystery.
So check this out. A 2003 study by Donnie and his colleagues put this whole thing to the test. They had one group of rats that got a shot of nicotine every single time they pressed a lever. Easy enough. But the second group, they also pressed a lever. But they got their nicotine shots at the exact same times as the first group, whether they pressed the lever or not. Their actions had nothing to do with it.
And the result was absolutely stunning. Just look at this graph. The filled-in circles, that's the rats who only got nicotine when they pressed the lever. The open circles are the rats who got nicotine no matter what. See how those two lines are practically sitting right on top of each other? Both groups pressed the lever almost the exact same amount. This was a bombshell. It meant the nicotine itself wasn't directly reinforcing the behavior.
So if it wasn't a reinforcer, what on earth was it doing? Well, the idea is that it was acting more like a signal, making other things in the environment feel more rewarding. And this same idea helps us study how we learn to talk about our own private feelings. A drug creates a reliable internal feeling, and scientists can teach an animal to respond based on that signal. It's kind of like a model for how a little kid learns to say, "I'm hungry." They connect that private feeling inside to cues they get from the outside world.
Okay, let's move on to our second strategy, which builds on this idea. Here, scientists use drugs to shake things up, to create what they call a perturbation in the system. The logic behind this is so simple, but it's incredibly powerful. Think about it like this. Say you've got two beakers, and they're both filled with what looks like the exact same clear liquid. How can you be sure they're the same thing? Well, you can apply an outside force. In this case, let's use heat. So you heat them up. If one starts boiling at 100 degrees Celsius and the other at 78, you know immediately they're not the same. You've got water and ethanol. Even though they looked identical, how they reacted to that perturbation revealed a fundamental difference, and scientists do the exact same thing with behavior. This is precisely the logic from a classic study back in '76. You're looking at the results for two different monkeys. Now, both of them were in situations that we would just lump together and call punishment. But when they got a dose of amphetamine, the drug acted just like the heat in our analogy. For the monkey on the left, amphetamine caused a huge increase in its responses. You can see that big spike on the graph. But for the monkey on the right, the same drug caused a decrease. One drug, two totally opposite effects. This was proof that what we call punishment isn't just one thing. It's at least two different processes going on under the hood. All right, our third and final strategy is to use a drug's known predictable effects. If you know exactly what a drug does to the body, you can use it like a chemical scalpel to carefully tease apart and test different ideas about behavior. And this lets us tackle some really big fundamental questions. For instance, think about fear. Does that feeling, your heart pounding, your palms sweating, does that cause you to run away? Or are the feeling and the action just two separate things that both happen when you're in a scary situation?
Well, a 1997 study gave us a pretty wild answer. Rats were trained so that a light would predict food, and this caused both a behavior and a change in their heart rate. Then the scientists used a drug to specifically block only the heart rate response. Take a look at the graph on the right. The drug totally flattens the line. The physical reaction is gone. But now look at the graph on the left. The rat's actual behavior? Completely unchanged. By surgically removing the feeling, they showed it wasn't the cause of the action.
So we've followed all these clues, we've looked at the evidence. What's the big picture here? What does all this clever detective work tell us about how behavior really works?
We've seen three key techniques in action. We've seen scientists use drugs as internal signals, which completely upended our simple idea of reinforcement. We saw them use drugs to perturb a system, which revealed that punishment isn't just one thing. And we saw them use the drug's known effects to surgically separate feelings from actions, calling into question that common-sense idea that one causes the other.
When you get right down to it, this all points to a core principle of science, and it's captured perfectly in this quote by Mark Branch. Progress isn't about proving what we already believe. It's about having the courage to challenge our own assumptions.
And that kind of leaves us with one final big thought. I mean, if these studies show that a seemingly straightforward idea like punishment is actually way more complex than we thought, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other common sense beliefs about our own minds and why we do the things we do are just waiting for the right tool to come along and show us they're not so simple after all?